The Oklahoma Commission on the Status of Women welcomes you to the panel discussion on human trafficking in Oklahoma. Lucy is a graduate student at the University of Cambridge, England, examining human trafficking. Her most recent research is a 102-page deep dive on Oklahoman human trafficking partnership responses, current gaps, and recommendations. Let's hear from you, Lucy.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. As Dr. Khan mentioned, I'm currently a graduate student at Cambridge, but I am an Okie. So in the last year, I did a deep dive on Oklahoma's state response. And I had three kind of big aims with that. I really wanted to know what we knew about human trafficking, and everyone's done a fantastic job talking about the data we do have, the data we don't have. But I really wanted to know, what did that look like? I also wanted to know who was doing what where. So actually mapping out all of those partnerships, and then hopefully having a lot of great conversations about like the gaps we saw and what we could do as the state to do better. So I reached out to 103 organizations across the state, and I was able to work directly with 40 of them, and had some great interviews and surveys with law enforcement, fantastic victim service providers, nonprofits, as well as tribes and health organizations. And I read a lot of papers. So I have this massive report if anyone's interested to read it, but I will show you kind of my key findings. One of the things I really focused on that everyone's talking about is the kind of statewide response. So what I found is that there were about 47 groups that were responding to trafficking, and these were across about 13 categories. And as everyone's kind of previously stated, most of these resources are in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. There might be one in Idabel or something. They're very concentrated. And you've already actually heard from all three of the certified victim service providers. And then I also found that there are three key law enforcement groups that specifically tackle human trafficking cases. Some people have hinted at it, but there are actually two human trafficking task forces. So one's in Tulsa and one's in Oklahoma City. And I actually didn't realize there were two before I started my research. So that was exciting. My paper also kind of gives a deep dive into like the laws, as well as the history of human trafficking response in Oklahoma, kind of from when some of the first laws were passed to more the present. I don't need to go over all of this now because there's been such a great kind of discussion of how hard it is to get data, as well as how victims could be represented multiple times just because of how things are set up. I will say that maybe the number that a lot of people have seen is, there's 790, this has probably changed since I pulled this, but 799 cases from the national hotline. But as Lori and Rose mentioned, there's a lot of complications with this number. So I wanted to, and one of them is that it doesn't actually include a lot of the state organizations like Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics cases. So I wanted to know what other data sets there were. So I was able to find 4, and through 4 of them, I was not able to find any juvenile sex trafficking data. And there are lots of layers in that, which I'm sure the panelists can go into. And then also, out of the 40 organizations I talked to, only 2 of them actually mentioned labor trafficking at all. So I think as a state, it would be really exciting to have more discussions around kind of the problem of labor trafficking, as well as maybe the response and support system. But as we've kind of seen, is that the awesome victim service providers have come together to compile data, and and specifically on adult sex trafficking. And the 3 amazing law enforcement groups also have a lot of data, but for reasons that I'm sure the panel can chat about as well, there's some confidentiality and jurisdiction stuff that they don't always share that quite the same way. So there isn't actually a central database, which I was kind of hoping for, but as all of the speakers have said, it's very complicated. So, and especially in the last kind of wild year of everything that's happened, there's been some turnover, and so that's a big discussion. But one of the key things I did find, crunching some numbers in the data I had, was that Black and Native American Oklahomans are disproportionately impacted by trafficking. That's not to say they're the only groups impacted, but if you go to the next slide, you'll kind of see the difference. So a student in 2015, not me, did a survey and for Oklahomans, and out of that survey, maybe 1% thought, or they thought maybe 1% of trafficking victims might be Native American. As you can see, just based off of the 422 cases I was able to look through, it's actually close to 16%. And that's almost double our state population. And we already have the second highest Native American population in the US. So I just think it's kind of important to recognize that difference. And kind of a similar thing with Black Oklahomans as well. And I think it's just important for us to kind of recognize maybe like why this is happening, as well as think about how we can respond to it. And organizations are doing a great job at doing this. It's interesting to kind of see the data we have. Another thing that was very interesting to me coming in was that over a third of the cases that I saw were actually self-referrals, which I had no idea that would be the case. And then another thing was that actually, and just like Melissa was saying, is actually a lot of these victims are US citizens. They're born in the US, which is also very interesting to me. So it's just to emphasize, this is not representative of all human trafficking in Oklahoma. This is only 422 cases of adult female sex trafficking, but it is still important to have a snapshot. And if you could go to the next slide, I have kind of 10 categories of recommendations and ideas that I had discussions about, but I'll just give you top 6 because these are, if I could have any wish granted, these would probably be the things. So had some great discussions around laws and some of the laws that could change. One of them was just a 2-word change. So changing the labor trafficking statute from commission to from discovery. So right now, law enforcement has to figure this all out and put together cases and get witnesses like 3 years after something happens. But if they could get it all together after they actually found the problem and they had 3 years, that would make probably a very big difference. And then we've already talked about data a lot, so I don't need to dive on that too much more, but it would be exciting to see, I don't know the answer, what we could do as a state for more kind of publicly available data, but that's a discussion to have. Something else was that a lot of people in my surveys thought only one human trafficking task force existed. So it would be kind of neat to see more kind of awareness of all of the cool things that multiple groups are doing, especially the amazing victim service providers you've already heard from. And then a lot of groups, actually almost all the groups, whether they were tribal or non-tribal, were all really excited to work together more. They all thought they were pretty tight knit, but almost every single person I spoke with really wanted to see what they could do even closer together. So that was really neat to see. And there were lots, every single person I talked to also mentioned communication, and they had some great ideas for what that could look like in the state. One of the other kind of really important things is that the true kind of experts of this topic are the survivors. They're the people that experience this. So I'd be really excited to kind of see more survivors' voices being highlighted in policies or task forces. And there's a cool organization that has guidance on that. That's actually founded by survivors. So there's some examples out there. And then the kind of last thing that I had a lot of neat discussions about was that sometimes it feels like it might be like a year at a time or a couple months at a time where we have these plans, but a lot of people were excited and they wanted to do like this greater vision of like a multiple year plan and see what could happen that way. So just having like a bigger vision. So again, these are all discussions that we can have, but it was really heartening to see so much good work happening and so many people really excited to work together in the state. So I'm very excited to see what discussions look like in the future, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions or if you want more information. So